Hey guys, what's going on? This is Travis P11. I'd like to welcome you back to the channel. And today I'm going to show you how to disassemble and clean an old school High Point 995. This is one of the early run models, and they've had a few slight revisions to these models that have taken place over the years. This model dates back to the late 1990s. Now, it's not a first production run, and I'll talk about some of the differences between the earliest models and what you see right here. But if you've ever been kind of curious about what a High Point looks like, say, under the hood, so to speak, or if you've ever been curious about how to clean them or how they come apart, it's a little bit different from any other firearm that I currently own. It's really not that difficult, and you don't have to be intimidated by it. This is not the TS model. This is not the Target stock model. This has the old Planet of the Apes stock is what they call it. But I'll show you how to take it apart. Now, it's going to take a few tools to take this apart compared to the regular cleaning that we do, say for an AR-15 or an AK-47. First of all, you're going to need some sort of a gun oil or a cleaner. I like to use Cleanse Oil, Field and Range Cleaner. This stuff works really good. A little bit goes a long way, and it does a great job to really get the dirt and grime off of stuff. You can use Safariland CLP, you can use Remington Rem Oil, you can use Ballistol, you can use whatever you want, Hoppies, whatever works best for you. Just make sure that it's a clean and lube or clean and protect type of lubricant. You can use old toothbrushes. I've got just an old brush that I use, just a gun cleaning brush. Barrel light, so I can check the barrel when I get done to make sure it's nice and shiny. This is just a cleaning rod that came with one of my handguns. I really can't tell you which one. It might have been a Glock cleaning rod. But we use this to get into certain areas where if we just need a little bit of an extension, but we don't have to go all the way down the barrel. This makes it a little bit easier for you. We've got some cleaning patches right here that we're going to use. You can also cut up an old cotton t-shirt if you want to, if you don't want to pay for these. These are a little expensive, but they're nice to use for the channel and so on. We're also going to use a 1/8 inch, I think that's an Allen key is what this is, an Allen bit. It's a 1/8 inch is what it measures. You're going to need that to take off one or two of the screws in order to get the barrel out of the stock. I'm also going to use a socket. This is an 8mm socket. I didn't have the US equivalent size socket that I need for these bolts. It was either too big or too small going through my socket set. So an 8mm will do the job if you have it. You really can get by just with a pair of pliers and say a wrench if you have one, but it depends on how much you want to grind this up and how much you really want to tear up those bolts. And these bolts could be tight or not. Mine were not that bad. This gun was clean before I bought it, so it was actually very easy to disassemble, but a socket's going to help out, and then either just a pair of pliers or just any kind of a wrench will do the job, okay? And then also we've got a bore. For the bore cleaning, we're going to go ahead and use my bore snake. This is a 9mm 380 brush. This carbine is chambered in 9mm. And so we're going to go ahead and use this one with it. You know, you can use a regular brass rod with a bore brush and go down from the rear to the front if you want to. Or I just recommend the bore snakes because they're quick and easy and they make an easy job of it. So it's going to take a couple different steps, a couple different phases. And there's a couple things I want to point out about this particular carbine as we run through it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get busy cleaning. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is ensure that the firearm is in fact unloaded. So I'm going to push the magazine release button on the other side of the grip here. Pull out the magazine. Okay, the magazine is empty. Pull back on the charging handle on the left side. Check, make sure the safety's off. Check the chamber, visually inspect it. I can see that it is empty. We're good to go. Also, you might want to use some rubber gloves or some nitrile gloves if you do a cleaning to keep all the cleaners off your hands and all the fouling and the carbon and the gunpowder and so on. But that's up to you. So an issue that I have with this carbine, when I bought it, I bought it used, there's a piece of Allen key that's in there that I cannot get out, or hex key. It got broken off inside the screw. So I can't take this screw off, but I can take this one out. It's still not enough for me to get the front side off. So that's going to stay on here. Now, this may or may not affect your Target stock model if you have it. It's not a big deal. It just means that when we break apart the upper and lower receiver, it's going to limit a little bit how much access we have to those parts, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I do a disassembly. So these could be stripped out. You might not even have these. I believe there's some threads in the barrel that these screws go into, or some divots they screw into, and so for now, I'm just kind of screwed, more or less. So we're going to go ahead and just leave those in there. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. I can still get off the heat shield without it. So from what I've seen and what I've heard, these are called a Chicago-style screw. What it is you've got a long screw with some threads on the end of it, and it's going to go through to the other side, and there's another identical screw head. Well, you're going to have to put a socket or a pair of pliers on one side and twist the other side in order to get them to come apart. The screw goes into the screw on the other side in some threads that it has, and you'll see that when I take it apart. You know, if you just want to use pliers and wrenches, you can see that this has been torn up pretty good from the previous owner. I'm going to use a socket to take those out, and I think we'll go ahead and make that our first step so we can get off the receiver cover and get that taken care of. So put your 8mm socket on here. Just go ahead and put this on the bolt. This is a side view, by the way, and just go ahead and start turning. Now I notice that the hex, or the bolt, is moving down here in the bottom, so you can put your fingers on it, see if you can hold on to it. I'm able to. It's really not that hard to do. And actually, at some point here, you're going to be able to just hand loosen it, which I think I can already do at this point. So we're going to go ahead and pull those out, and then we'll show you what these screws look like. Okay, get this out of the way there. There you go. So this is what you have. You've got the screw right here, some threads on the end of it. It's going to go in this little cap right here. Put these off to the side, make sure that you don't lose them, but they do just basically screw together. And then we're going to go ahead and take off the screw towards the front also. So you go ahead and repeat that process on the front, and then we'll come right back. You want to make sure you wipe those off with a patch with some oil on it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just wipe these screws off. You can give them just a little wipe with some oil. They don't need to be super wet or lubricated, but just make sure that they get cleaned off. They may have some fouling on them, maybe some powder and so on. With the magazine, I do like to wipe that off, and that's just because sometimes you can get some dirt and grime. It was actually really windy and kind of almost dusty or sandy when I was shooting this thing last time. So your magazine, it's always a good idea just to give it a little wipe, you know, drop oil on a patch. Let's back this up a little bit here. There you go. And you can just wipe them off. You don't want to leave any excess oil in the magazines, but you can also make sure that your magazines are nice and clean. We put about 100 rounds through this carbine when we tested it at the range, and I'll put a link to the range test video at the end of this one. But you can see you definitely get a buildup on the top of those magazines from being fired. This is a blowback action gun, so you're going to get a lot of crud and muck that's going to build up inside the receiver. And I'm really not looking forward to taking it off because it could be fairly filthy inside. So now the next step that we have here is we want to remove the charging handle. You can use a socket on that if you want to. Otherwise, you can just use a wrench. This one's a little bit tight, or if you have a pair of pliers, you can use that too. I really just need to just nudge it a little tiny bit to take it off, and it's going to unscrew. When you screw it back in, you just want to make sure it's snug, but you don't need to over tighten it. Like, that's all it took to get it to come loose, and I did not have this come loose at all while I was out at the range the entire time that I was out there. It might be a little bit dirty. It's okay to clean it off with a patch with some oil on it, and again, set that off to the side with those screws. You can take off this little, you can take off the roller if you want to. Here's your bolt right here, your charge handle. Just go ahead and wipe those off. I like to make sure that the threads have a little bit of oil on them so they don't get rusted and everything goes together nice and smooth and so on. Just go ahead and reassemble those, just like this. Okay, all set to go. Set that off to the side. Now at this point, we can go ahead and take off the receiver cover. So pop that off, it literally just comes right off. To wipe this off, again, patch with some oil on it and just go ahead and give it a wipe. I have a little bit of rust on this thing. I don't know if this is really that resistant. It does have a decent like black finish on it or some sort of bluing, and I'm not sure. Okay, now the next step is to take off the heat shield. So if you've got the early gen, even though I can't take off that front sight that I showed you earlier, it doesn't really affect things. You can just lift up and pull back, and the heat shield is going to come right off. And believe it or not, it actually does help. When you're shooting at the range, it does block the heat. I mean, I understand it's called the heat shield, but it is functional because that barrel does heat up pretty good. The funny thing is, no matter how many times I wipe this thing off, I still have like some oxidation that comes off on the pad. So maybe it's just because this is an old part, you know, and you got some old metal that's starting to age and get some patina going on. It still does come off a little bit dirty. So give that a little bit of a wipe off with some oil. Okay, we'll go ahead and pull that off to the side. Okay, now before we can take out the receiver and the barrel, there's a couple things we have to do. We've got a screw up here on the front that needs to be removed right here. So we need to take this screw out right here. And what that is that's going to keep the barrel band and the barrel into place so that the barrel doesn't pop out of the stock. I believe it's the only screw that we have to remove. So you're going to want to take your 1/8 of an inch Allen bit, or if you have Allen keys or whatever, you can use those if you want to. And we'll go ahead and just take that screw out. When you tighten this back up, you don't want to over tighten any of the screws on this thing. You don't have to use a lot of torque on it to get this stuff to go back together. In fact, this is you know, an old plastic stock. There is metal on the other side that takes the screw in though. Take that out. Okay, get your screw out of there. Just go ahead and wipe it off. There we go. Okay, got that all taken care of. Okay, cool. All right, we'll go ahead and set that screw off to the side. And then before we can remove the barrel and the receiver, you've got a little bar right here that's going to have to slide off the bottom. It does have your serial number on it. To take this off, I mean, I can almost, okay, I can hand slide it right off. I mean, it was tight, but it's been taken off so many times. Otherwise, you can just take a patch and just take a screwdriver and push, and it'll literally just push it right off. But I'm able just to use my hands here to remove it. This little bar right here, go ahead and wipe that off with a patch with some oil. There we go. Set that part off to the side. And then when you take your barrel out, you can see how the barrel sits down here with the band. It's just going to pop right out. Literally, just take the entire receiver out with the trigger group. Everything comes out in one piece. Just set your stock off to the side. There really isn't much you have to do to it. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move the stand out of the way, and then we'll start cleaning off the upper and lower receiver, and I'll show you how to take the two halves apart. With this particular gen, I can give you a little bit of advice for the next step up for the gen in the model, but the rear on this might be different on your model of high-point carbine. Okay, so this is basically your upper and lower receiver. If you've got a very early production run of this carbine, you're not going to have this little plate on the bottom here. This little plate basically is going to slide forward, and that's going to allow the upper and lower receiver to come apart. If you have a first run model, there's going to be a pin right here that you're going to have to hammer out with a punch, with a pin punch or some sort of a punch. You have to take that out before the upper and lower come apart. You're not going to have this particular little plate right here. It's not very complicated. Like I said, a problem you run into is because I can't take off the front sight, this upper receiver is going to slide all the way down and basically sit. It's going to run into that front sight. I'm not going to be able to take it off completely, but I'm going to be able to clean it off with the access that I'm going to have to it with no trouble at all. I mean, everything is put together in one piece. It's really simple to deal with. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give everything a general wipe off with a patch on it with some oil. Wipe off the barrel, underneath of it. You know, it's kind of odd. The lubrication points are just basically all over the place because you've got an action that slides on the lower receiver, and we can access more of that as we take it apart. Wipe off around the trigger area. You've got your trigger bar right here. You've got like a counterweight in the rear. And you've also got the area of your safety. You can wipe underneath your trigger. Just go ahead and give everything a nice wipe off here. Move that barrel band down so you can get that wiped off too. Okay, now if you're watching this and you have a newer generation of high-point carbine, there could be a band right here in the front that has to slide forward before you can do the next step. This part's just a little bit tricky, but not really. You're going to have a recoil spring that's going to be down here, and it's going to sit on a bar inside the upper receiver, and it's very easy to reassemble it. You don't have to be intimidated by it. This little plate right here, hopefully you guys can see that, this guy right here, go ahead and just slide that back. It's a little hard to do with gloves on here. There we go. So it's going to slide back so that your little plunger, your little plug that's on the rear of the receiver, there we go, right there. This is going to allow it to come apart now. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take the two pieces apart, okay? Okay, so what you're going to want to do is pull back a little bit and then pull up, and it's going to just pop right out. And then you've got some tension on that recoil spring. Just go ahead and lift forward, and the whole thing is going to come apart, okay? The whole receiver is going to come apart. So set that off to the side. Go ahead and pull out your recoil spring with your plunger. I'm just going to leave these two parts together. It's really not a big deal if you don't separate it, but do wipe it off with a patch with some oil on it. Okay, again, this is your recoil spring. It's going to go back in this way too. And there's a hole right here that it's going to go into. We'll show you that when we reassemble it. A little bit tricky to take it apart, but not too difficult. Really reminds me of like my old Jimenez pistol or my old Lorson L9C that I used to use back in the day. It's a little tricky to work with since we can't take it apart. Go ahead and just slide this little piece right out. Okay, this little plunger. When it goes back in, the peg is going to be facing forward when you put it back in the upper receiver here. Okay, go ahead and wipe that off. Okay, just set that part off to the side. There you go. It does clean up really easily. No problems at all. Okay, now at this point, we're going to go ahead and wipe out the lower receiver with a patch with some oil on it. Make sure you get the area of the feed ramps. This part is going to be especially dirty. This is where all the all the eating happens, right? So I'm going to hit this with a couple patches. If you want, you can hit it with a brush to get it scrubbed off a little bit, just depending on how dirty it is for you. But we're not quite ready yet to clean out the barrel. I'm going to use a liberal amount of cleaner here just to make sure that I can get this all cleaned up nice and easy. The nice thing about the cleanse oil is you can leave this stuff on fairly wet and then go back and wipe it off with a patch, and then it'll take off a lot of the muck that you're running into. I can see this was just coated in burnt powder before. Feed ramps especially. Put your finger in there. See how dirty that is? Okay, I'm going to go over this with a couple patches and then I'm going to come right back. One thing I do want to do though is I want to take a patch on this cleaning rod. And if you have a handgun, this is something you can do too. You run the cleaning rod with just a little tiny bit of oil down the grip or down your magazine well. And what that's going to do is that's going to scrub out all the crud and crap that gets down there. So I'm going to scrub this out with a fairly wet patch, and then I'm going to hit it with a dry patch. Get all that stuff out of there. You can see that. I mean, that patch just came out filthy. So we're going to keep going over this a couple times, and then we will do a barrel clean. So you guys do the same when you feel like it's adequately clean for you, which is the patches are coming off fairly clean every time you wipe it off. Then you come right back, and we will continue. Now with this upper receiver, if you just tip it or tap it back a little bit, it's kind of awkward here, your firing pin spring and firing pin are going to come right out. As you can see, I've got them right here. We're going to set those off to the side right now because now we want to clean the barrel, or we want to clean out the inside of the barrel, okay? Just let that hang and that can sit off to the side. So we're going to go ahead and run the bore snake from the rear to the front of the barrel. We're going to pull that through a couple times, get that nice and clean. Again, it seems a little bit complicated, but it's really not. I've done this only 3 or 4 times now total, and I pretty much have the procedure down pat. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run that down. Again, you want to be careful. You don't want to let that scratch the barrel, so just kind of let it sit. It really isn't going to mess up the finish. I haven't had any issues with it so far, but go ahead and run that bore snake from the back to the front just a couple times. And that'll get your barrel nice and shiny. You can check that with your barrel light if you have one. If not, you can just hold it up in the light and look right through it if you want to. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my bore snake through. Again, like I said, I did 100 rounds of mixed brands of ammunition. Okay, I'm going to do that 2 more times, and then I'm going to come right back. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is this area where the recoil spring comes out. I'm going to take my little single cleaning rod here with a little bit of oil on it. Just scrub that out because you're going to get some buildup in there too. Also gives you a chance to inspect the firearm while you have it apart like this. Look for any kind of cracks or anything. It's a little bit dirty, but it's not too bad. All right, now we want to focus on the upper portion of the receiver. So again, guys, you can see how awkward this is since we can't take it apart, but really all you need to do now is we're going to wipe out and scrub out this entire area. See how dirty this is? Wipe out this entire portion, hit these little channels with some Q-tips. You can hit the firing pin channel with a Q-tip with some oil on it, but then run a dry patch down the center where you see that little check hole right there. You want to make sure that your channel is dry inside, but it's okay to have a light coat of oil on these inside portions. Make sure everything inside has just a real light coat of oil to it, especially these rails right here and on the inside, because this is where you have your contact points when the gun cycles, and mine's filled up pretty good with carbon. So I'm going to wipe this out with some patches, get it nice and clean, and then we will come right back. We'll see a before and after, because right now it is pretty filthy. Also, with your firing pin and your spring for the firing pin, they are going to go into each other as such. So it is going to fit back in there. When you reassemble it, this is going to sit back in place, and this is going to go back into the upper receiver, which we'll show you in a little bit. But I just want to show you, make sure that you keep these 2 springs together, okay? Okay, so here's my after when I'm all done. Nice and shiny and clean. It took me about 15 minutes of scrubbing to get it to look that good. You want to make sure that your firing pin channel is dry inside. Make sure you have a little bit of lubricant on these 2 side channels. Make sure the face where your striker comes out is clean and dry. You can have a little bit of lubricant inside. It isn't going to hurt anything. Put some on the bottom, on the insides also. And you want to make sure that you have a thin coat of oil kind of up here on the sides, because you are going to have some contact between the upper and the lower receiver. So again, it's really a pain. I can't take this part apart. I can't remove this, but again, I will definitely get that into the gunsmith as soon as I can. All right, so we're going to begin the reassembly process. It's really not as difficult as it looks. So let's go and show you how this is going to work. Now, it's a bit awkward for me having rubber gloves on. I don't have the best traction in the world, but we're going to do what we can. Barrel's nice and clean and so on. So what I like to do is just simply start in this kind of a state. Make sure that you've got your little flap here pushed up when we reassemble the upper and the lower, so that your plug will go back into place so you can lock it back in, all right? In your center channel here, go ahead and reassemble the firing pin and the spring for the firing pin. There you go. And you want to drop that down here in this little center channel right here. Go, just push that back into place. That's good to go. Push it back down, make sure it's down there. Okay, it is. All right. And now what we want to do is we want to take the little plunger that I was talking about before, or this rear bolt, this rear piece that keeps the upper and the lower receiver together. You want to go ahead and just slide that in the back right here. So it just kind of sits, just kind of hangs out there in your upper receiver. Okay. And now you've got this part right here, this front part of your guide rod and your recoil spring. It's going to rest on this little tab that you have right here on the inside when you put it together. This part's going to be a little bit awkward, but it's basically just going to go together in one shot. You're basically going to just sandwich it all together, bring it together, and then just pull down, and it's just going to go over and down and snap together. It's going to make that noise just like that. All right, so let's go ahead and do this real quick here. Again, you might have to practice this a couple times. I mean, this wasn't something I could do just right away. It took me a little bit of practice too. So go and take that recoil spring, push it back into here, lower part of the receiver. Get that out of the way. Push that right down into there. Okay, so it's going to look like this. There you go. Okay. And now we're going to bring everything together, and magically it's going to work, right? We hope so. Okay, fiddle with it a little bit. Go ahead and sandwich these two pieces together. You're going to have to maybe pull that plunger back just a little bit to the rear. There you go. And get it down there in the hole. Okay, it's going to snap together, and then you can lock it back by pushing back on that little flap. Okay, you might have to watch that a couple times to get it. All right, so the first thing we want to do is get that little tab back into place where you've got your serial number. So just go ahead and set your stock back in. Everything's just going to fit right back into place. This little barrel band up here, by the way, make sure that this lines up with the screw hole from the screw that you took out earlier. Right, so if you properly were able to reassemble it, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, you should see that. We got your serial number right there, and again, everything is squeezed nice and tight. Your front should look like this right here. There you go. Okay. Have not put that screw back in. That's going to be the next step, but go ahead and take your little barrel band, or your lower receiver band here, and just slide it on the tab right here. Okay, so go ahead and put that band back on. It'll just click back into place. Good to go. Okay, the next step is to go ahead and take your 1/8 inch, hopefully it's a 1/8 inch, I'm guessing that's the size, but Allen key, and go ahead and take that screw and just put it back in the front here. You don't need to over tighten it. In fact, you're going to see the stock go back together. There's a like a washer on the other side that's metal. There's a washer that's metal, and you're going to see the screw going into the threads on the other side. This takes just a little while, but it's going to get snug. And, you know, don't strip it. Obviously, you don't have to overdo it. Check the other side. Yeah, it's poking out like maybe about 1/8 of an inch right here on the threads. You're good to go when you do that. Okay, you don't want to over tighten it. Barrel's not exactly free floated, but on something like this, it doesn't matter. This thing's actually pretty accurate anyway. All right, the next thing we want to do is, let's go ahead and put the heat shield back into place. And so you've got a little tab right here. The heat shield is just going to slide right on. It's going to lock into the front sight. Okay, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and reinstall the top cover. So go ahead and take your top cover and just put it back into place. Make sure you've got your safety down, your safety lever down. There you go. Okay. And this kind of sort of locks back into the top cover. Now, if you got that Target stock, yours is going to be a little bit different than mine. Okay, we're going to take those Chicago screws, and we're going to just go ahead and push one in on the left side over here. Okay, there you go. And then just take your screw and just kind of hand thread it through until you feel it lock into place on the other side. You really don't need a lot of torque to put these two together. I mean, it just until they're snug, and that's pretty much about it. So I'm gonna just go ahead and use my socket here, wrench to do so. Okay, so we got that front one nice and tight. Let's go ahead and repeat the process on the back here. So go ahead and take your screw. Again, I'm going to take this end right here, the little stubby end. I'm going to push that in on the other side here. Don't know if it really makes a difference, but I like to keep it consistent on both sides. It might make a difference for recoil, having these screws to come loose, although I did 100 rounds and had absolutely no problems whatsoever. There we go. Just, again, hand threading it until it gets nice and tight. Can't really tell you what kind of a torque setting you're going to need for something like that, but it is tight and it's good to go. All right, the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and thread in your charging handle right here. So go ahead and do so. I just like to wait, just tighten it till it gets nice and tight. You can't turn it anymore with your hands, and then take your wrench and just twist it just a little bit. Again, it doesn't take much. Make sure that you don't grind it up too much there. You don't really have to. There you go, that's good. I'm not going to overdo it because it didn't come loose when I was at the range last time, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and check the chamber, and again, make sure that we are empty. We are. Okay, we're going to go ahead and just cycle it a couple times and make sure that it will charge. There you go. You're going to hear some springs. You're going to hear those striker springs scrunch up a little bit, but it really is not a problem at all. And I noticed that this is smoothed out a little bit even since I took it out and cleaned it, obviously. There you go. All right, go ahead and put your magazine back in, and you are ready to rock. So again, 100 rounds. It was really dirty inside. It took a long time to get it cleaned up, but it's still just an absolute joy and a blast to shoot. So this is your vintage early run high point 995 carbine, chambered in 9mm. I think that's it. I don't think we missed any parts of it. You might want to just go ahead, while your safety obviously is going to block the entire receiver, so it doesn't matter. You can test that if you want to, but we should be good to go. So Anyway, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching my cleaning of the Hi-Point carbine, chambered at 9mm. I'm sure the target stock isn't a whole lot different, but there could be some differences under the hood, especially towards the front of the receiver with disassembly. Unfortunately, I can't give you any advice on that, but anyway, I think we're all set. So thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe. Make sure you check out my podcast called Caliber Corner. We do it Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Central Time. We talk guns and ammo. Make sure you do check it out. But in the meantime, I want you guys to have fun, be safe, check out my range test on this particular carbine, and as you know, we will talk to you soon. Thanks for supporting the channel. All right, guys, bye-bye.